Hey there, I'm Shane. In this video, I'm going to be talking about my editing workflow in Adobe Lightroom. I'm going to go from start to finish with a wedding gallery, talking about organizing, culling, editing, and ultimately uploading my photos for the client to see. So this is going to be a little bit different of a video compared to other ones that I've put on this channel so far. Rather than focusing on camera gear and camera operation, I'm going to be talking about my post-production editing workflow. This video is going to be focusing on organizing and going through a lot of photos, not really so much on editing them and how I like to just go photo by photo. I'm going to make a separate video on that topic. In this video though, I'm going to be using a wedding gallery as an example, and at this wedding specifically, I had a second photographer with me, and the two of us were using multiple cameras with multiple different lenses on them, and we ended up with over 5,000 photos in total at the end of the day. So it's kind of a worst case scenario in terms of just a bulk amount of photos from one event. So it's a great example to show how to actually tackle a huge project like this. However, the concepts that I talk about in this video are the same that I use even when using a smaller project. I'm going to try and make this as applicable to any situation as possible, so I hope that I can help a lot of different people out by using this video. In this video, I'm going to be using a Windows computer, as you can see, and the software I'm going to be using, as the name of the video implies, is Adobe Lightroom. I'm going to be using Adobe Lightroom Classic. However, the concepts that I talk about will be perfectly applicable to Adobe Lightroom CC. I just use Classic because I've been taking photos for a while and it's the system that I've been using. But in the future, I'll probably flip over to CC if it's compelling enough, but as of now, I prefer Classic. You might have noticed by now that this video is shot in a really weird aspect ratio. You'll see why shortly, but the reason for it is because I use two monitors while editing. This is because I find it's essential to have the ability to see on two screens so that you can actually go through your gallery and see an individual photo at a time. This gets a lot more of an overall perspective and helps really speed up the workflow. I have worked on a laptop in the past and it is entirely doable. However, I find having a second monitor is rather essential. Another tool that you'll see me use in this video is my loop deck. This is a very useful device, which is essentially just a keyboard for editing. It just has dials and knobs on it that adjust different settings within Lightroom, and I find it's really useful for just speeding up and making my workflow more intuitive. It's not at all necessary, and for years I edited without one. It just was on sale one day, so I bought it, and I find it's very handy to have. I'm going to break this video up into different segments, and if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see the different segments at the bottom of the screen now. I'm going to start off with importing the photos, organizing, culling, editing, exporting, and ultimately uploading the photos, and then I'm going to conclude with my final thoughts. However, without further ado, let's get into importing them. So the first and most obvious step is importing your photos, and this is going to be different from camera to camera. With my Sony cameras, I just plug them into the computer and I throw them into a folder. Ultimately, what you want to end up with is a nicely organized named folder with all the photos inside it. I just like to put them in one giant folder, and then all you're going to do is simply grab that folder and drag and drop it into Lightroom. This process is going to take a little while to import all the photos at once, but it's the most simple way of doing it. And what you should end up with is all the photos in one folder within Lightroom. Make sure that all of the photos imported and that there wasn't any errors, because the last thing you want is to have a photo that you took not end up in the editing workflow. However, Lightroom's a very reliable software for this, and I've never had an issue like that. Once I get all the photos imported into Lightroom, the next step is going to be making folders within that folder that you imported. All you need to do is right-click on the folder and then create a folder within that folder. I make a naming hierarchy starting with a number, which the first one is going to be 1, and then say bride prep. And then I'm going to do 2 hyphen detail shots, 3-groom preparation. The reason I do this is because by having a number at the start, it's gonna help streamline the rest of the editing process by having them organized by which time of day these photos were taken. And ultimately, when I end up uploading the photos at the end, these names will help make the whole process a whole heck of a lot easier, because again, they're going to be sorted by a number, which is the order that I want them to be in. The last folder that I like to make is an unorganized folder, and I just do 0-unorganized photos. And I take all the photos that I have and put them into this folder. This allows me to see how many photos I have to organize still as I divvy them up into the other folders. How you break up the photos into folders is entirely up to you. I like to break them up depending on the situation or environment that the photos were taken in, or the time of day. This makes it easier for you to kind of edit the photos in bulk, because the photos that are more similar will be closer together. This also helps me just from a psychological standpoint, because breaking it up into more digestible portions makes it a whole heck of a lot easier to actually tackle the project. Once you have all the folders set up though, it's just a matter of selecting the photos and throwing them into the appropriate folders. It's a little bit of a time-consuming process, but it's very much so worth it down the road. Another useful thing that I like to do is to flag the photos by color so that I can tell what lens the photo was taken with. So again, I select all the photos and I simply use the filter bar in Lightroom, and I choose a lens. I select all the photos with that lens, change the color to, for instance, red, and then all the photos with another lens, change the photos to yellow, and so on and so forth. This just saves me time down the road when I'm editing the photos, so that I can see at a glance that 2 photos were taken with different lenses, so that's why their colors might not match up perfectly, and I might need to fix that. Now that I have the photos organized, it's time to move on to culling, or choosing which photos I'd like to edit and which ones I'd like to delete. Personally, this is the hardest part for me, just because it takes a lot of time and you just don't see as much of the headway that you'd like to when you're going through it, but it's entirely necessary and you gotta get it done somehow. And thankfully, because of the organization system that we set in place earlier, it's a lot easier to kind of look at how many photos you have in certain sections of the day and kind of break it down a little bit easier with numbers to actually quantify the progress that you've made. The next topic that I'm going to talk about though is essential for the rest of the video and is the foundation for basically my entire workflow, and that is using the flag system within Lightroom. And it's very simple. So what I'm going to do is open up the grid view and then look at the folders in the filter again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark the photos as being flagged and unflagged to be seen, and then having the photos marked for rejection as being hidden. So by doing this, essentially what I do is when there's a photo I want to hide from my view, I hit R on it, and that will mark it to be rejected, and it'll be kind of just hidden from my library. And then photos that I want to keep, I hit the tilde key on. Most of the time what I end up doing is I just don't hit anything on a photo I want to keep, and on my favorites I hit the tilde key on. And then photos I want to get rid of, such as out of focus photos, photos that are duplicates majority of the time, or just photos I don't like, I'll hit R on. And I'll go through all my photos, essentially getting rid of the ones I don't want to see, and then choosing my favorites by using R and tilde. And it just takes a long time, but you can go through all the photos this way. The benefit of this workflow is that it's non-destructive. So essentially, say for instance, I reject a photo accidentally, or I choose a photo I want to keep that is actually out of focus. If I go back to the filter bar and I show the rejected photos, they're all there because I don't delete them immediately, allowing me to keep duplicates in case I want to edit them still or swap them out with one of the photos that I kept. So it's a non-destructive process to cull your photos, and it just is a little bit more space, like non-conscious towards how much storage you need. However, I'll show you how to permanently delete all the rejected photos when you're finished the editing process so that you never delete photos until you actually want to. Overall though, this process is very time consuming, and there are other programs such as Photo Mechanic out there that are dedicated raw photo processors. And depending on what computer you use, this might be a better option for yourself. For myself personally though, I find it a little bit easier to keep all the editing workflow within one program. For that reason, I stick to Lightroom for all my editing. Now that we finished culling all the photos, it's time to move on to the fun part, and that is editing. And this is the most enjoyable part of the day for myself, because you can actually see a lot of the organization and work that you did earlier start to pay off in a big way. What I like to do is start off with my first folder, and in this instance, it's the bride preparation. And what I'll do is I'll choose the filter again, and I'll choose the lens that I used most during that section of the day. For instance, right now it's the 24mm, and I'm gonna start editing all the photos with that lens. And then I'll copy and paste the settings that I used with that lens onto the next lens, try to match the colors as best I can to what I'm trying to do, and then edit all those. And I'll just go step by step through each lens. And I find this is the most effective way to tackle a small group of photos at a time. The nice thing is the variances between the photos is usually pretty minimal, considering they were shot at the same time of day and environment, because that's how you organize them, or I organize them at least. And it usually is a lot faster than it would have been if I just was tackling everything at once. With all that said though, at the end of the day, editing is still going to be a very tedious process. And ultimately, it's why we charge money to take photos. Even though you spend like 12 hours capturing these photos, the average wedding takes me around 3 days to go through all the editing process and organization. And it's just kind of is what it is. Unless you want the quality of your work to deteriorate, in my opinion, going photo by photo rather than using a blanket preset is the best way to edit your photos to actually improve your work and to get the highest quality content to your clients. Depending on the situation that I find myself in, I do have my own presets to help speed up my workflow. However, when it's possible, I try to work from the ground up to make an edit so that I have a more unique look for each shoot. And often when I have thousands of photos like this, making a tone curve and color profile that I want to use across all the photos will help make the final product look a lot more cohesive and maintain a very similar theme, which is something that will look better if it's going to go into a printed format or even just in your online gallery. After you finish editing all your photos comes the most anxiety-inducing part of the editing process for me, and that is deleting the rejected photos. All you need to do is select like the main folder and then hit Control and Backspace. What this is going to do is pull up all the photos that you have marked for rejection. And then I choose to permanently delete all these photos. This will get rid of them off your hard drive and get rid of them forever, but it's what you need to do, and it's time to get rid of them because you don't need them anymore. I do like to keep all the raw formats of the photos that I did edit after the shoot, just in case down the road I want to use them for marketing purposes. This isn't required because once you end up rendering these out, you won't really need them anymore unless you plan to edit them again. However, I like to keep them for archiving purposes. We're approaching the home stretch now though, and the last thing that I like to do before exporting my photos is to sort them. And I know this is confusing because you think, I sorted everything at the start of the video, what are we doing now? What I'm going to be talking about is sorting the photos within the folders based on kind of the subject matter rather than the time it was taken. For editing, you want all the photos grouped up by their similar situation or time of day. However, when you actually deliver these photos, you might not want to have them in that order. For instance, say during the first kiss during the ceremony, you have two different angles of the first kiss. However, the one that you took second was better than the one that you took first. And for the first kiss, it's kind of like the moment and you want to have the best photo first. So I switch them around sometimes. So that way it's kind of broken up into a little bit more of a logical process and it just will look better at the end of the day. The last optional step that I like to do is choosing my highlights or kind of best of. And the way I do this is using the photos that I flagged. So if I use the tilde key throughout my editing and culling process to choose my favorites, I basically simply go to all the photos in the main folder and sort by the flagged photos. And then I can just see the kind of top 100 or 50 that I chose. And I kind of have the best of there, and I'll export that. The reason that I do this is because when you're delivering a portfolio this large, if, for instance, this wedding ended up being around 1,200 photos, which was unreasonably large. The majority of the time, even if it is a couple hundred photos, it's nice to have a kind of short section of highlights, because even though you're going to be intimately familiar with all these photos and where to find the best ones, at first glance, the client isn't, and say they want to show these photos to their friends, their family. Having a highlights folder is really important to kind of put your best foot forward when they're showing the photos to other potential clients, and it will ultimately pay off really well in the long run if you make sure to always include kind of a highlights folder at the beginning of your final kind of package that you deliver. The last step in Lightroom is exporting, and even though this is a very dry topic, it's extremely important because it's the culmination of all the work that we did so far. And if you export the photos improperly or in a kind of non-optimized format, it's going to result in delivering the client a non-optimal version of the work that you worked so hard to make. So all you're going to do is select all the photos, right-click, and then choose to export them. I already have a preset made for this, and you can make a preset based on what I'm talking about, but I'll show you what to do. The first thing is the file naming and file location. And I'm going to put the location as the same folder that the photos are in. This will use the same folder structure that we made earlier in this video, allowing the photos to be in one spot. I'm going to choose to have the photos make a new folder to go in, named Final Edits or whatever you would like, allowing you to have a nice easy folder where all the JPEGs will end up in. Next up is file naming, and I'm going to use a custom name. I'll show you here, and you can simply use the text that I have here, but what it's going to do is organize the photos with the kind of number of the sequence that you put it in, allowing you to organize them in the order that you chose rather than the name of the file or the time it was taken. Of course, you can add more stuff to the name, such as the resolution, the file size, and other stuff like that. I'm a little bit more of a minimalist in this way because I just wanted to have a very clear-cut name for the file that the client can see, and it's just a little bit more aesthetically pleasing when seeing all the files. With regards to the file type, I choose to use a JPEG format because it's still the most universally accepted file type, even though it is not the best. It is definitely going to be the easiest for clients to work with currently. And with regards to the quality, I keep it at 100%. I don't limit the file size. What I do limit is the short edge pixel quantity to 4,320 pixels. I do this because it's kind of the top end of overkill. Even though the A7R III can shoot in a higher resolution than that, I find that the file sizes can get a little unmanageable, so this keeps them all at a very consistent size between 7 and 10 megabytes. And I keep the DPI at 300, which is a very standardized print resolution. For the rest of my settings, nothing is too exciting here. I don't add any sharpening post-editing because I do it all during the editing process. I keep the only thing for metadata as my copyright, as just my name. In terms of post-processing, I don't do anything, and I don't have a watermark on my images. So after that, the last thing that you need to do is just click export. This can take a while, and even with my baby, she will be locked up for a while when exporting this many photos, and it can take upwards of an hour or more depending on how many photos you're exporting or the strength of your machine. But at the end of the day, it's all going to be organized and ready to upload once you complete it. Which leads into the last piece of the puzzle, which is actually uploading the photos online or delivering them. If you're giving it via USB, it's as simple as just throwing these files onto a USB and you're done. However, if you're uploading them online, I like to use the website Pixieset. This is not sponsored, it's just the one that I choose, and I believe it's probably one of the most popular options out there. And it's just a nice website that you can organize them into the folders that you used before. So simply all I do is I split the photos up into folders, and then I just upload the photos into the galleries. And what you end up with is a very nice organized system that's easy for the clients to download off of. And again, because I chose my highlights and exported those separately, I have a nice little like starter highlights folder that the clients can browse through before diving into the rest of the images. Well, that's it for the video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it and found it useful. If you have any questions about any topic that I might have not spent enough time on, please feel free to leave a comment below, and I try to answer all the questions that are there. And I know this process that I used in the video isn't necessarily the most streamlined or fastest. And if you have any suggestions about ways I can improve it, I'm all ears, because again, this is still what I do. The main benefits of the process that I have, I find, is especially when you're a part-time photographer like I am currently, being able to break a project down into more bite-sized components like this makes it easier to work on it with a varying schedule. For instance, some days I only get a couple hours to edit, and being able to tackle one segment in that time is a much more manageable project and a lot less overwhelming to think about. But if you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment letting me know and like the video, and maybe consider subscribing to the channel. It goes a really long way, because this isn't a sponsored video. I'm just making these on YouTube and the only thing that I get is ad revenue. So helping me grow the channel will help me make more videos like this in the future, which I really enjoy doing. But anyways, thanks again for watching. I hope you have a fantastic day and stay safe, and well, Happy New Year. See ya.